All right, it is just about 7 o'clock. I think it's time that we get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth First Aid on Site Foundation webinar. My name is Alex Argami, and I'm joined by my fellow Detroit Country Day student and First Aid on Site board member, Arnav Modi. Today, we will be discussing how to prepare for pre-med and medical school. Before the webinar starts, on behalf of First Aid on Site Foundation of America, I would like to thank our event sponsors. Page Automotive, American Center of Stem Cell Research and Regenerative Medicine, and our exclusive media sponsor, Dragon Eagle TV. Medical schools are highly competitive. This year, more than 50,000 students will apply for medical school. According to data compiled by the Association of American Medical Colleges, the national acceptance rate is just 43%. We are joined tonight by a distinguished panel of speakers who can give us insight into navigating this competitive process. Cheryl Sullivan graduated from the University of Toledo with a BA in psychology in 1989 and a master's degree in counseling in 1991. She is the former director of advising for the College of Arts and Sciences at Oakland University. In that capacity, she has extensive pre-med advising experience. Currently, she is the college counselor at Detroit Country Day School. Matthew Rohde graduated from The Ohio State University in 2020 with a bachelor and master's degree in science with a major in molecular genetics. He is currently a first-year student at Mayo Clinic Alex School of Medicine. Anush Vajala graduated from Detroit Country Day School in 2016. He is also a 2020 graduate from Cornell University, currently in the medical school admissions process. Ariana Zargami. Ariana graduated from Detroit Country Day School in 2019. She is currently a sophomore at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, intending to major in Spanish and neuroscience on the pre-med track. Ariana serves on the executive boards for the Vanderbilt Undergraduate Honor Council, Amigos, and Katie's Art Project. She is also a member of the Community Service Board at Vanderbilt Hillel. Additionally, she is involved with neuroscience research at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, her sorority, and the club ultimate frisbee team. Yuri Zhang. Yuri graduated from Detroit Country Day School in 2020. Yuri is currently a freshman at Johns Hopkins University. She is interested in psychiatry and is a co-host of Introspect's podcast on YouTube about self-discovery, purpose, and daily pre-med student life. She also actively participates in MedLife and MedTech clubs at Johns Hopkins University. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the chat and we'll have a Q&A session after our panelists are finished speaking. Let us welcome our keynote speaker, Mrs. Cheryl Sullivan.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So, Alex, I want to share my screen. Is that okay if I do that right now? It'll take your screen off. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And my portion of the presentation today is to talk about how you can prepare for applying to medical school, or just really it's not really applying to medical school when you apply to college. So if you look at my screen, it says pre-med is not a major. And that mainly is, I think there may be some schools would have a pre-med major, but for the most part, it's a really bad idea to pick pre-med if it's available to you. Doesn't mean that you wouldn't have a pre-med designation, but as I'm speaking to you today, I'm talking about your other major. And so before I get too deep into any of this, I want to say that anything I talk about today is meant to encourage you, never to discourage you. So I'm going to talk a lot about science courses, and I'm going to talk a lot about experiences. And depending upon where you are in this process, you may say, but I haven't done these things. That's okay. Wherever you are in this process, you can always get there, but you have to know that you're doing it, because it's a very competitive process, but I hope that doesn't scare you. And the second thing, I know that Matt and Anush and Ariana and Yuri are going to talk about their situation. I mean, what they've been through. It's a long process. And I think sometimes when you tell people that you're interested in medicine, whether you're at the holiday dinner, or you're at a wedding, or just talking to your friends, people discourage you either unwittingly, perhaps they mean well, they talk about how long the process is. And one thing I want you to think of is it's, for the most part, an 8-year process. And even to be a college counselor or a high school counselor is a 6-year process. An attorney is roughly a 7-year process. And so it's longer, it's certainly longer, but it's not as long as people say it is. I am conscious of the internship and the residency that is in addition to the 8 years. But I ask folks to think of that in terms of a paid apprenticeship. So if you think of it as, you're getting paid, you're still learning when you're a resident and an intern, and you're getting paid to do that, probably roughly the salary of a school counselor. I say not jokingly. So I want to talk about your preparation. And I'm trying to go to the next screen. Pushing, this happens to me. Okay. So these are the courses that you would take in high school if you had the opportunity. At Detroit Country Day School, we do offer these courses. We offer organic chemistry. We offer a lot of upper level courses. With some of you, if you're not a Country Day student, maybe you don't have some of these opportunities. And we always say they teach that in college. So, but if you have some opportunity, the most important subject is probably chemistry. And so for most medical schools require at least 1 year of principles of chemistry and then a year of organic chemistry. In fact, I think all medical schools, all dental schools, all veterinary schools require these chemistry courses. It doesn't mean that you have to take these courses in high school. The thing about organic chemistry in high school at Detroit Country Day School, and I don't know about if maybe some of you are not Country Day students, we really make this course very accessible to students. So we do not make it terribly, terribly difficult, but at the university level, it is a difficult course. And so if you can have some exposure to this chemistry course, I think it is a plus, because maybe it wouldn't scare you. Another requirement is 1 year of biology. The first part of biology is typically botany, zoology, and the second is genetics and cell. Doesn't have to be in that order. And that is what is written as most pre-med requirements. Now, I've often said, I do not think that is necessarily enough biology for a person to do well on the medical college admissions test. And I hope Anush and Matt will talk about the MCAT. But that's the stated requirement for most schools. Some schools will include a biochemistry. Some schools will include some additional courses, but for the most part, it's that. If you can believe it, for medical school, calculus is not required for most medical schools, but it just seems that as people muddle through these science courses, they do stumble through calculus. It's something that I think most of you would wind up taking a calculus course. I do like to see a statistics course as well, but for the most part, the stated prerequisite is pre-calculus. And then, of course, physics, a year of physics. So the first half of physics is typically mechanics, and the second half is electricity and magnetism. Now, these are courses that a student would take in order to prepare for the medical college admission test. There's no specific major required for medical school. So, there are people who apply to medical school who do not have science backgrounds. Typically, the most common major for medical school admission is biology, but that is certainly not a required major. The biology major contains all required courses. So that requires, typically a biology major will require the 2 years of chemistry, will require the physics. So it just so happens that is a popular major. But for medical school, Matt was telling me that there's an English major an English teacher, a former English teacher in his class at Mayo. So it's you don't really have to have these subjects, but in order to do well on the medical college admission test or the MCAT, you do need to take these subjects and probably some more subjects. And so Mrs. Chen asked me to talk about the difference between dental school and veterinary school. For the most part, the requirements are similar. I do there's a social science differential for dental school is typically economics instead of normally a person attending medical school would choose psychology, sociology, because there is a social sciences section on the MCAT now. But those differences to me are very, I don't think it would make a difference. Yeah, I never found those courses to be something that would sway a person. Really, the core course is the same. And also for physical therapy, those are the same prerequisite courses for physical therapy. There is a difference in the entrance exams. The dental schools do require the DAT, the dental admission test. Some schools will also take the graduate record exam, the GRE. When you're talking about medical school versus dental school, they're sort of looking at the same sort of things. They're looking for someone who knows that that person is interested in the subject, so has done some volunteer work or some sort of work to show that they know about the profession. I always say these schools, they don't make many bad choices. So medical schools typically do not admit people who don't have a demonstrated interest. Very few people drop out of medical school, dental school, or for heaven's sakes, veterinary school is of all of these the most dependent upon hours of service. The difference between medical school, dental school, and veterinary school, and I'm I'm happy if Matt and Anush and Yuri and Ariana, if their experience is a little different. But I think that for medical school, often they're looking for sort of a broad thinker, someone who makes, has good judgment and, really a strong thinker. Dental school becomes a little more practical at some point in that they're looking for, people very interested in the dental profession. I find that veterinary school is quite practical. For example, I'm going to talk about universities. And if you're interested in veterinary school, it is often not critical, but it really helps to attend an undergraduate school that has a veterinary program. That is not the case for medical school and dental school. So there are some nuanced differences for veterinary and dental. When you're thinking about colleges, I will tell you for sure that your undergraduate school, sort of the prestige of your undergraduate school, is not especially important. So if you're all high school students right now and you're thinking about where you might attend college, it really will not make a difference to you, sort of the rankings of your school. What really matters is how you shine at that school. And so when I'm working with students at Country Day who are talking about medicine, I'm always thinking about that. If you say you want to be a physician, which in my mind is just a tremendous helping profession, it's difficult to get in. It's not a secret society. So I'm here to help you. And sometimes picking the most prestigious or the most challenging school may, in hindsight, not be the best place. So I do not want you to think in terms of prestige when it comes to medical school, for your undergraduate school, your first 4 years for your medical school admission. As I said, the most common major is biology, but you can have any major as long as you have the prerequisite courses. In some schools, some of the most competitive schools, they're pretty impressed by people who are not science majors. I mean, they talk about music majors and people with all different majors. It's doable. Music is a huge major for college, and then to take all the pre-med requirements, but it's doable. Mrs. Jen also asked me to talk about direct admits. And what a direct admit means is that you would be on some level selected from high school to a medical school. Now, some of them are a direct admit, like you're in medical school, you do not have to take the MCAT, you've been chosen from high school to be in medical school. When I was younger, I'm as old, as the hills, but there were more of these programs. There were these 4+2 they were 6-year programs. You do a couple years of undergrad, and then you do your 4-year medical school. Most of those 6-year programs have died out. There are still some around, but when I'm working with a student who's interested in direct med, we investigate how direct that direct med really is. A lot of them give students an advantage in admission, but they don't, like, often they have to take the MCAT, but maybe they don't have to score as well. They're not in the competitive pool of students who are simply applying to medical school because they're in this direct program. So there are 4+4. When students say to me it's a 4+4, I always say, how is that a direct med? I mean, it wouldn't going to college and then going to medical school also be a 4+4, but it is sort of the bird in the hand, philosophy of, at least I would have some additional assurance that I would be admitted to the school. And I understand that because this process is competitive. When you're looking at these direct med programs, they are typically, the students who do best in the direct med are typically extremely mature students. And I know that sounds like are you calling me immature? Well, no, but some students, they just seem sort of ageless. And that's how I always can tell if a student is going to do well in a direct process. If I look at the student, I'm talking to the student, and that student, I think, yes, that student could be in classes with, that 17-year-old student could be in classes with 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds. So it really is something, I could get a very good vibe about who's going to do well in a direct process. And the thing about direct medical school programs is often they're at schools that you maybe would not otherwise attend. So not always, but for in many cases, when I'm working with students who are looking at direct programs, I sometimes ask, would you ever, if it weren't for this direct med program, apply to that school? And often the answer is no. Now, if you are admitted to a direct med program, you go through the 4 years, you go through your degree, and you decide that you want to throw your hat into the ring at other medical schools. Typically, you are able to do that. You can take the MCAT and you can go out, and one of my advisees went through a direct med program and then decided that she wanted to try to get into a different medical school. So she did. She's a second year at the University of Michigan this year. And University of Michigan has long gotten rid of their direct med program. So the timeline for high school students for choosing a college, after your grade 10, we hope that you'll go through grades 9 and 10, concentrating on your schoolwork, not concentrating too heavily on test preparation or any of the stuff that would, be directly relevant to college admission. But we hope that you will go straight through, not grades 9 and 10, and then start thinking about colleges, start looking for fit. We're always interested in fit for you. You apply to college applications become live in August of your senior year. And so there are bunches of deadlines within that. November 1 is often a threshold deadline, but you've got lots of time from August to November. And then even after that, students will apply to schools out of the November 1 is typically the early action, early decision pool. And I'm going to briefly go over types of admissions. But you've got most of your senior year to apply to colleges and decide where you want to go. You typically start working on essays the summer before your senior year. If you're a Detroit Country Day School student, you'll write an essay in your English class at the end of your junior year. And so depends on how hard you work on that essay, because we don't always use that essay. We rarely use that essay for college admission, but we certainly could. And so you start working on it. Then we have plenty of time to work on essays, though. People are so afraid of this essay process, and I just don't think you should be. Whatever age you are in this webinar, I do not think you should be afraid of the college admission process. There is such a thing as the common application, and that is an application, you put in your personal statement and then you send that information to all of the colleges that accept the common app, which is most colleges. And then for your specific colleges, you only have to write a couple of supplements or something like that. So it sort of streamlines your college application process. When you're a senior, you've got some decisions to make. And the timeline's pretty important. And this is an important decision. So how am I going to apply to each college? Now, not all colleges have these options, but an early decision means if you admit me, I will attend your school. And so that is the most powerful decision that you can make. If you admit me, I will attend your school. Early action, and some schools restrict it to say you can, like Harvard will restrict it and say, if you pick me as an early action, it's not binding, but you can apply to no other school early action. So we know that at least you favor us as much that you don't have to come, you don't have to attend our school. Early decision, Vanderbilt, Northwestern, Duke, a lot of schools like that, that is binding if you're going there. Regular decision is what existed back in the dark ages when I was applying to college, and it just, it opens in August, ends in January. You have to apply, and then you decide in May what college you want to attend. It doesn't bind you in any way. And then there's rolling admission. Some colleges have no deadlines. They just keep accepting applications until they fill their class. Michigan State is, for the most part, a rolling admission school. Even when colleges are rolling admission, we really recommend that you consider them early action. And we recommend that you do submit your applications as early as possible because it does help you. And so when you're thinking about colleges, I think that it is so important to, I'm working with a lot of students right now, and a lot of students, especially strong students, are interested in medicine, and that's a blessing. We need people to be interested in medicine. But when you're applying to college, especially the most competitive colleges, I downplay medicine in the application. So typically, because first of all, you're not applying to medical school unless you're applying to a direct med program. So the most competitive schools are going to want to hear about your scholarship. Number one is always scholarship. What is it that you want to study? So I like the way Ariana is picking Spanish as one of her majors, Spanish and neuroscience. I thought, well, that's a beautiful combination. And so, she's at Vanderbilt, and so that they were interested in the fact that she's so good at Spanish, and she's so interested in Spanish. It's a subject that would be interesting. And I have such a hard time with this. I have to have this conversation at least 20 times a year with folks about picking medicine as your major when it is simply not a major. Sometimes it's a box that you can check on the college application, but it is not a major. So you also, when you're in high school, when you think about leadership, I always talk about the fact that it does not have to be an elected position. It could be leadership in the classroom. I like to think of it more in terms of impact than leadership. And I always say, if you weren't here, how would the school be different? And that all comes through. And it follows you really through college. Character, what kind of person are you? Are you a generous person? Are you a curious person? Those are very important, regardless of your major. And then service, especially for medical school. And I hope that the students in college and even Matt and Anush who are done with college will talk about how much they had to do, how many service hours they had to get, clinical hours, and what they had to do to demonstrate that they're truly interested in medicine. But when you are in high school, your service does not have to be in the medical field. In fact, the past year with COVID, I know that a lot of the volunteer work has dried up. So service is really service to your community, And I don't want you to think only, since you're in high school and you're applying to college, I don't want you to think only in terms of medical school. So I hope nothing I have said has scared you. I will tell you that no matter where you are right now, no matter where you are, you can get there. We had a student one time who started in college in Algebra 1, which Algebra 1, Algebra 2 don't even count toward a 4-year degree. But the person, wanted to start over and build a strong foundation in math, and that was not a Detroit Country Day School student. That student has been a physician for 20 some years, but it did take a little longer, because if you start with more developmental courses, then it just takes a little longer to get through. But this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. So please never, ever be discouraged. And when you're sitting at your holiday dinner and people say, oh, do you really want to do that? If you really want to do it, go ahead and do it. I think it's a beautifully rewarding career. And I hope that nobody like me, like a high school counselor, will ever discourage you. We really are here to help you. So that's my bit, Alex.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, for a very informational presentation. I do see a question in the Q&A right now, but the Q&A session is at the end after all speakers are done with their presentation. Now, let's move on to our second speaker, Ariana.
Thank you.
Oh, wait,
Oh, sorry, was it you, Yuri?
I think it's supposed to be me.
It is, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. My portion of the webinar is mainly directed at younger students who want to go to medical school. The rest of my fellow panelists have and will definitely explain the more concrete aspects of applications in medicine to a T. So I thought I would instead pose some questions to you all. Hi guys, as was introduced, I'm Yuri. I graduated from Detroit Country Day School in 2020, and I'm currently a freshman at Johns Hopkins University, interested in psychiatry. Most notably, I have started a fresh new podcast, Introspects Podcast on YouTube, which I will link in the chat or the Q&A. I will link in the chat later. In the podcast, we talk about things like what makes us us and delve deeper to find meaning in and purpose in the past, present, and future. My co-host, Saati Origanti, is also a pre-med, and she is looking to go into pediatric neurology. So if you are interested in medicine, this podcast will definitely help you. We share our tips, tricks, and tidbits of university life as pre-meds. A lot of you are high school kids, some of you even younger, I presume. And I'm so proud and thankful to all of you for attending this wonderful webinar to help explore your interests and invest in your own futures. You are all already doing much more for yourselves than I have at your age. When I was your age, I didn't even know organizations like this existed. I only found out after they invited me to speak, but I think organizations like First Aid onSite are such great platforms to spread information. So my question is, why medicine? Now, that's a tough question, or is it? As you see in the picture, it's a question that a lot of pre-med students seem to struggle with, judging from the vast number of articles online on how to nail this answer. I've often questioned Sathi about why she wanted to go into the medical field. To be honest, I've asked a lot of my pre-med friends. And of those I've asked so far, none of them have been able to give me a completely satisfactory answer, myself included. So a part of my attending this webinar is definitely out of my own greed to search for answers. But before we get answers, I'd like to pose some similar questions to you all in the audience. Before diving into such a lucrative career path, ask yourself why and if you really want to go down it. How much of this are you really doing for yourself? Are you simply pursuing passions other people tell you to? Do you know what your passions are? For more analysis into what makes you you, I'd recommend watching episode 1, Nice to Meet You, Who Am I? And episode 3, I'm Rarely Valued, of our podcast. After you do that, think about this. Would you still go into the field if you made the same wage as a fast food worker? Would you still go into the profession if it were not as highly respected? These are all very common questions, by the way. Weighing the costs and benefits at varying degrees of respectability and monetary benefit. At what point do you draw the line? My friend Sahizi, co-host of Introspect's podcast, graciously provided me with a perhaps less offensive equivalent to an example I was going to give. In middle school forensics, students would choose a piece that resonated with them to perform on stage, pretty self-explanatory. But oftentimes, the student's interpretation would be oppressed in favor of more correct interpretations that would win at competitions. Ironically, the category in which students participated in was the interpretation of published pieces division, interpret and perform. How much of that did the student have a say in, and how much was fed to them? And yes, the student would be happy if they won a prize, but certainly less so than if they had won exclusively on their own merits. In the end, the coach is doing the interpretation so you can win, for sure. It comes out of place of wanting you to succeed. But you have to keep in mind that you are the performer in your own life stage. I feel like this is demonstrative of many children who want to go into the medical field. Though the medical profession is definitely not easy, choosing to traverse the path towards medicine is perhaps the easiest decision for some of the quote unquote high achieving friends out there. The lucrativity, the monetary benefit, the societal approval, especially from the family and friends, are all very alluring. But there's only so far you can progress without complete dedication to the field of medicine. You have to really love it. And to do that, you have to learn about yourself. I'd rather consider these things now while it's still more socially acceptable to be figuring things out than when I'm 50 years old working a job I realize I never truly wanted for myself anyway, but one I cannot leave for the fear of the same backlash, the same familial pressures I couldn't face when I was younger. Stuck in the hypothetical birdcage I've literally constructed for myself. Not to mention all the years I've invested into the field. What would the sunk cost fallacy say? Now, perhaps this is not the advice you came wanting to hear. You want concrete advice to bring you from point A to point B. But I'm sure everyone else in this webinar will give you plenty. But understanding your own passions and motivations is the most important advice I can give anyone. For some extra advice, watch Introspect's podcast on YouTube. I'm only joking. After you've traversed the existential crises, I'd suggest shadowing or interning. It's probably the most important glimpse you can get into your future life if you desire, because it's definitely difficult to decide to go into a field without proper exposure in said field. How? Well, that's a good question to pose to Ms. Nicole Chen and the First Aid onSite Foundation. It's similar to finding research in college. At Hopkins, something crazy like more than 95% of undergraduates are involved in some sort of research. If you don't have the so-called resources, blind emailing is always an option. Read some papers they've published, look into what they do. It shows that you've looked into and considered the questions I've posed today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. And now on to our third speaker, Ariana.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Try to share my screen. It's not working. Okay. So my name is Ariana Zargami, and I'm a sophomore at Vanderbilt University, and I'm just going to talk tonight about my experience applying to college and so far as a pre-med student, and just really emphasize the idea of finding a path that works for you. So I just put some reasons why I chose Vanderbilt, but I think in general this applies to most students. I'm assuming that most of you guys are currently applying to college or beginning your process looking for schools. And first, something that's really important is location. You're hopefully going to be spending the next 4 years here, and you want to find something you really enjoy. For me, I love the idea of an urban campus. I love Nashville, but also how the campus itself is enclosed. So that's definitely something to consider. But also class size and access to professors is extremely important, especially for students on the pre-med track. For me, I found it very important to be able to have a personal relationship with my professors and be able to attend office hours and just form that connection. That's especially going to be important later on for getting recommendation letters. I've already asked a few of my professors for rec letters for other things other than applying to medical school, of course, but I think that's very important to be able to find a school where you can form those connections. Also, environment and quality of life. I've been so surprised at how collaborative the students have been at Vanderbilt and how much everyone wants to help each other out. And I think that's very important in a pathway like being pre-med, because the classes can be difficult and it's always nice to have other people who are willing to guide you and help you. And quality of life, of course, is important. Being pre-med is difficult. You are going to be spending a lot of time studying, so it's nice to be able to have that balance and be able to enjoy yourself, because that is a very important aspect of college as well. And then, of course, something for pre-med students to consider, or I highly recommend looking into, is just the medical programs. I knew at Vanderbilt there was direct access for undergraduate students to do research at the medical center and programs to do shadowing there. And I think that's very important for students to be looking at their prospective universities, the universities they're interested in, to see what type of programs they offer for undergraduate students interested in the medical field. So moving on, class selection. The first bullet point, I listed some of the STEM classes that I've taken at Vanderbilt so far. But what I wanted to talk about specifically is the idea of a pre-med curriculum. Of course, there are classes that are required for medical school, like you have to take general chemistry and biology, as Ms. Sullivan said. But what I wanted to talk about is that there isn't any core curriculum that you have to stick to. For example, I'm a Spanish major. I love taking humanities classes. That's something I'm very interested in. You don't have to take all STEM classes to be pre-med. Take whatever makes you happy and find a balance. Of course, you do have to take chemistry and organic chemistry, but you're not stuck on that path. And I think that's something that I really wanted to emphasize, because at least for me, going into college and applying, I didn't realize that, but I really do enjoy taking the humanities, and really just find whatever you enjoy. And also, speaking to the idea of balance, there needs to be some balance in your course selection. For example, I know some of my friends wanted to take general chemistry and general biology together freshman year. Personally, for me, I knew that was going to be a lot. Those are both very difficult classes. So those are some considerations that you can make when you're applying to, or when you're scheduling classes, but also the same applies for high school. Just finding the right balance to make sure that you can fully maximize your studying for that class. For example, I chose to take organic chemistry over the summer because I knew that was going to be tough to fit in during the year. That's a really hard class. So there's definitely that aspect of balance too, finding what works for you and what you can handle. And now, speaking to time commitment, pre-med, it definitely requires a lot of studying, a lot of work, but I think there is this misconception that if you're pre-med, you're going to be studying 24/7. That's not the case. There's still plenty of time to join clubs and have a healthy social life. Obviously, it does require a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, I'm studying a lot, probably a lot more than I was in high school too, but you do have a lot of time in college to explore and join clubs and extracurricular activities. And then also, something I wanted to touch on is the idea of advising. At Vanderbilt, at least, we have the Health Professions Advising Office and Alpha Epsilon Delta, a pre-med fraternity. I'm assuming most other colleges have similar pre-med opportunities, and that is something that I highly would encourage prospective students to look into when they are applying to college, because I've personally found these resources so useful in just getting guidance and helping plan out my track as a pre-med student. And I think that's really useful, and students should utilize these resources if they are available, to just connect with other students and advisors to put them on the right track to make sure they are checking off all the appropriate boxes to apply to medical school. So extracurriculars, I just listed some of the extracurricular activities I was involved with in high school and some that I'm involved with in college. But I really do want to emphasize the importance of extracurricular activities. I would highly recommend joining these. It's a great way to meet people, but also just meeting people that can give you guidance. For example, I've met so many people in my clubs that are pre-med and have recommended professors to me in certain classes to take. But also what I wanted to touch on here is the idea of balance. Ms. Sullivan mentioned this in her talk, but you don't necessarily have to be in clubs that are pre-med oriented. Really, you just need to find something that you're passionate about and you enjoy. For example, I'm very involved with the Honor Council in college and with Hillel. And in high school, I didn't really do any pre-med clubs necessarily, but just find something that makes you happy and that you're passionate about. And I would recommend finding something pre-med, but I just want to throw it out there that it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Just find something that you enjoy. I think that's a really important part of college in general, just having that experience. And then touching on research, service, and clubs, these are all aspects that are going to be important that I'm sure the other students will touch on in their medical school admissions process. But with research, going back to forming relationships with professors, my intro to neuroscience professor freshman year started talking about a neuroscience lab that was doing deep brain stimulation research. I was absolutely fascinated in that and talked to the professor about who I should contact. And when I started my research process to find a research lab, I contacted them. That was my first choice, and that's the lab I'm currently working in now. And I've learned so much, and I really enjoy it. But that's definitely something that I would recommend. Talk to your professors. They know people. They're all well connected. But make sure to start early and be persistent, because it certainly is a daunting process, but it'll all work out. And then with service, extracurriculars, again, these are very important. But I really would recommend, just from my experience, finding something that you're passionate about and make sure to get involved. And also, aside from being pre-med, it's just a great way to get involved and meet people on campus. And then with shadowing, as I mentioned earlier, Vanderbilt does have a direct program to find shadowing. And that is something I would really encourage students to look into when they are applying to college, to see what type of programs that their school would offer. But I know that's difficult right now during the pandemic, but there are opportunities online. So that is something that I would just encourage prospective pre-med students to look into. And in conclusion, I just want to say that you really should try to find a balance that works for you. Obviously, there are certain requirements for medical school, but really just truly find what works for you and go at the pace that works for you, and just find a balance at the end of the day that will allow you to be your best and achieve all of your goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Now on to our next speaker, Anush.
Hi. I guess, yeah, so I'm Anush Vejala. I graduated from Country Day in 2016. In high school, I went to the International Science and Engineering Fair 2 times, and I started doing research in high school at Wayne State University on neural stem cells, and that I got a scholarship from Cornell for a research scholarship, and I ended up doing research in biomedical engineering and tissue engineering there. Also, like, thinking about how mechanical forces influence cardiac development. So there was a trajectory from high school through college that I used in that sense, in the type of questions that I was interested in, and that I also explained in my interviews. And then I also, I guess, in high school, I was also an IB diploma candidate. I was one of the few kids in my class to do that. And I think that type of balanced curriculum, thinking about things more broadly, I also did that in college, and I took a really wide variety of courses, both in humanities and sciences and engineering. And I think at the end of the day, when I was applying, I think the single biggest thing was, what was my narrative? What were the different experiences that led me to medicine and the type of how I want to practice medicine, not just the specialty. It doesn't seem like they care as much about the specialty, but more about what type of career do you want to build for yourself in the future, and what have your experiences, do your experiences prove, do they lay a solid foundation for what you're saying you want to do in the future? So yeah, I can talk more about any of that, or what I did more at Cornell in the question and answer session.
Thank you, Anush. And now on to our next speaker, Matt.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt. As Anush said, I think this would be maybe a good time to start filtering those questions through the Q&A so we can talk about them after. But yeah, so I am a first-year medical student at Mayo Clinic, Alick School of Medicine in Rochester, Rochester, Minnesota. Um, yeah, as far as applying to medical school, I think as Ms. Sullivan said, I don't think that that's something that I worried about a lot in high school. It's really something that kind of um, you kind of set yourself up for an experience in high school and to going to college. But then I think in college is really where um, most of your application is really developed and where you are developed as a person. As far as where you are going to college, I don't think it really matters very much at all. I think so I went to Ohio State. If I were compared, head to head, everything else were the same, to somebody who went to a really fancy school like Harvard. I do think that they would probably, take that person over me because I went to Ohio State. But I think in reality, what's more important is just setting yourself up for opportunities. So, if you want to do research, does your school have research? And it doesn't have to be, research, at a really fancy university. Ohio State has tons of great research, so would Wayne State, as Anush mentioned, he did in high school, Michigan State, all these schools. My roommate actually is in the other room. He went to Hillsdale in Michigan. He did research on biodiversity in one of the, kind of like forest areas of Michigan. So, I think really it doesn't have to be sort of so cookie cutter what you picture as, doing research on cancer or doing research on, stem cells or something like that. It can be really tailored to you and tailored to what opportunities you have. But just in college, I think, setting yourself up for the opportunities you think that you want to explore. So Ariana mentioned, having a hospital nearby. It's great. I think that is an important thing. It doesn't have to be, Mass Gen in Boston, which is, kind of like associated with Harvard, but, just a hospital. There's tons of them in Detroit, honestly, that are great hospitals that, tons of people there who do lots of great research. And in Columbus, I, would just shadow at different hospitals. None of them were, particularly amazing, but you still, learn a lot from the doctors and how they interact with patients and things. So I think as far as, kind of like the meat and potatoes, like the main things the opportunities that I would imagine you kind of want in college, I would say they're kind of mentioned before, but, research would be one of them, shadowing, clinical experience, and then like non-clinical volunteering. So, any place that you can, get those kinds of four things, I think is a great place. And from there, I think, as Cheryl said, really having like the ability to stand out there and being able to sort of kind of go, follow a passion of yours down one of those avenues, I think is really what's more important. And yeah, I would be happy if we could all take questions now.
Thank you, Matt. Once again, on behalf of the First Aid OnSite Foundation of America, I would like to thank Ms. Sullivan, Matt, Anush, Ariana, and Yuri for your excellent speeches today. This will be the end of our presentation today. Today's webinar is recorded and will be posted on our website, firstaidonsite.org. First Aid OnSite Foundation of America is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides a platform for high school and college students to gain experience in the medical and dental field. For more information, please visit our website, firstaidonsite.org. Now we are moving on to our Q&A session. Feel free to ask any questions to our speakers in the chat Q&A section. So I see some questions already. The first question is it fine if I take some of these courses senior year rather than junior year or sophomore year?
It is fine because you are not applying to medical school. You're applying to college. And so I will tell you that in the college application process, because of the timeline, if you don't have, let's say I'm applying, well, most people take physics as seniors, but if you don't have the course in the 11th grade, then your final grade isn't considered when you apply to college. So that's something to consider, but really, my concern is just that you have as much exposure to these courses as you can have within your comfort zone. So, I will definitely help you with this, but I'm happy. You definitely don't need these courses in the 10th grade. And I know there are some 10th graders who take, advanced placement chemistry, and they're very advanced, and that's very much to their credit. But this is all about you individually. And I know that all the 4 young folks have said so too.
Our second question is, how many medical schools should you apply to?
I guess I'll go first since Anush doesn't seem to want to answer. I applied to 23 schools, so it's kind of a lot. I know not everybody applies to as many as I did. So like my roommate, he applied to I think 11 schools. So there's a pretty wide range, and I think it sort of depends on one, how sort of confident you are in your in your acceptance. So if you aren't so sure, you should apply to more schools. If you're or also if you kind of have like a narrow range of what you want. So if you're someone who really only wants to stay in state, partially maybe you want to stay by family, or if you want to those are really the only schools that are financially realistic for you at the time, then I know lots of people who just applied to in-state schools or within the tri-state area. So there's a pretty wide range of how many schools people applied to. I think Anush could also talk.
Yeah, so no, I think a lot of people that I talk to, or advisors, they would tell me at Cornell 25 to 30. So I applied to like 28 schools. Yeah. But you obviously don't have to apply to that many. It's definitely very expensive to apply to a lot of these schools. And there's a lot of hidden fees in the process. But as Matt said, I think it is about how confident you are, and also how wide your school list is. Then if you're going to apply to 11 schools, then you should have a lot of schools that you're well above the statistics range for. So I think yeah, so then you have less reach schools that you can apply to if you apply to less schools. Yeah.
I think it's good to mention the cost. I think I can't remember the exact numbers. Basically, it sort of works like the Common App, where you have sort of an initial fee to use the application system, which is called AMCAS, and that's similar to the Common App, where you sort of have common essays that you write for every school, and then you have kind of like supplementary essays for each school. But I would say, I think usually the Common App, there's sort of like a set fee for your first school, and then there's a smaller fee for each one that you're at after that, maybe like $30 a school. And then each school, most schools will send you a secondary application in which they ask for some extra information about you, usually some extra essays, and then that costs somewhere, I think I usually paid somewhere between $70 and $150 per secondary. So you could easily spend probably a minimum a couple $1,000s applying to medical school, which is one of the kind of major problems with the application process.
But this is like the last thing you should be worrying about. It's like the very last step is your school list, and also you don't have to fill out all the secondaries even. So I think it's getting your application together is the biggest thing first.
Okay, our next question is, other than online shadowing, do you have any suggestions for activities to demonstrate strong interest in the dental field, especially during COVID?
Would that be for me because you guys aren't dental? I don't think. I mean, I do have. I've actually. I think that we have some students who are shadowing even during COVID at dental schools just to see. I mean, and at dental practices just to see if they're interested in dentistry. But if you're in high school and even if you're applying to a direct dental, unless you're in the 11th or 12th grade, I think this is tough. I really do think it is tough. And I don't know how these schools are going to choose people, because I don't think a lot of people are going to be able to do this direct shadowing during COVID. So
I mean, what I could think of, so it's not for dental, but one of my friends recently graduated, and so it's easier for them to get a paid position. But there are paid receptionist positions, like other allied healthcare positions where people are still hiring right now. So I don't know if that's mainly in medical clinics, but that could also be dental clinics. So the ideal clinical experience for anything is something where you're paid, where you have hands-on clinical experience with patients, where you're actually doing something for your patients. And ideally, if you're trying to work with a population that's underserved in some way. And so if you can find the trifecta of those three, that's the perfect thing.
I think what you said is pretty important, and I don't know if it's possible because these are mainly, I think the audience is mainly high school students, but if
Yeah.
you could find an area where people are underserved and you could do something there, like we
Yeah.
have two dental schools in the state of Michigan. One is, unless something has changed, the University of Michigan and Detroit Mercy. And so I do think that they have a lot of commitment to underserved folks. I wonder if you could look into that, to the
Yeah.
person who asked that question. I wonder if you could look into it, but it's not as easy as it used to be.
This isn't a direct answer to the question, but I attended a webinar from the medical school at Vanderbilt talking about what you can do during COVID. And they said a lot of schools are going to start including questions on the applications along the lines of like, what opportunities did you miss out on, or how did COVID impact your process? And they really just emphasize the fact that like everyone is kind of in this boat, like nobody can really do anything that much right now. So it's not something you should overly stress about because they obviously will understand.
Yeah, I think if you're in high school, I don't think it's necessary for you to be getting that clinical experience right now. Yeah, and in my application process, in my application, there was a bunch of COVID questions. Every single school had a COVID question. So, yeah.
Our next question is, what is pre-med and do all universities have pre-med?
I guess pre-med, my understanding is it's just like a track or like a pathway to becoming a doctor. As Ms. Sullivan mentioned, most schools don't have a traditional pre-med major, but it's essentially just the pathway that you're taking as a college student to be on track to apply to medical school. So there are certain classes you have to take, you have to meet certain requirements like shadowing, service, research, and taking the MCAT, but there traditionally is no like pre-med designation, if that makes any sense.
Well, like Ariana said, you talked about Vanderbilt, you talked about the advising. If you, like you're a Spanish major, a neuroscience major, and then you have the pre-med check, which means that those folks would, you'd be in their pool. Like probably the reason that maybe the reason you knew about this webinar at Vanderbilt was because you were in that track, but it really is just a separate set of advising. Anush and Matt, did you ever use any pre-med folks at Cornell or Ohio State?
Yeah, on and off. Yeah, there. I think the places that were, like as Matt said, like for example, like Harvard, like Cornell's advising wasn't amazing. But places like Harvard, I think what makes it easier, even more than just the prestige, is the fact that there's so much support for you to package your application together. So maybe when you're applying to undergraduate colleges, it's not just Harvard, it's other small liberal arts colleges. Is there enough support for you? Is there enough people that are around that you can go to that can help you figure out, for example, if you fail an exam or if you feel like you aren't getting the opportunities you need, are there people you can go to that can help you find those opportunities? Is there that support system? And Cornell didn't really have a lot of that. And so a lot of people struggle, but you have to find that on your own. Yeah. And also, I guess going back to the pre-med, what is pre-med? So I think about this in terms of other countries where they enter right away into medical school. And so I would say pre-med is what skills do you want to get that you can apply in medical school? So what skill from these 4 years, what skills, what unique skills can you receive that you then, when you become a doctor, when you're learning to be a doctor, you can apply this unique perspective or you apply this different perspective. Or else there's no point in us doing 4 years before we enter into medical school, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, for advising at Hopkins, at least as a first-year student, it's pretty explicit. You have to check a box. You have to go on like campus groups or handshake and indicate interest. And after that, you'll have to go attend some webinars. And after that, you can meet directly with pre-health advisors.
Yeah, at Ohio State, it was a similar I guess, situation where you had, and you could have any major you want, and then you additionally had like a pre-med, pre-law, pre-vet, whatever you wanted. You could check that box, and then your advisor would know to give you advice on that situation. So they could tell you, hey, you need to take the MCAT on this day, so we want to make sure that you have this class before that so that you can be prepared for the MCAT. So yes, I don't think some schools have it as an explicit major, but I think that's pretty rare. And yeah.
Okay, our next question is, how can pre-med students best prepare for top-tier medical schools like Mayo? And why did you choose Mayo?
Great question. I chose Mayo. So when I applied to like 23 schools. I got interviews at a lot of them. I got interviews at maybe 18, 16 of them, so which is a lot. And I was very sort of happy, and that's not like a very typical experience. And it was really a great fun time. But when I interviewed at those schools, I was kind of just looking for what a school that would give me opportunities. Again, you know, in college you want the medical, you want the opportunities that set you up for medical school. In medical school you want opportunities that set you up for residency. So I was just looking for a school that had a lot of research, had a lot of clinical exposure, and where there was like room for me to like be helpful to a clinical team. And I thought Mayo Clinic was a really great fit. Also, it was actually the cheapest school that I got into. So they gave me a really nice scholarship. And I think that's a big part of it. One of the schools I got into would have cost me $400,000 for all 4 years. It was about $100,000 per year. So that's really a lot of money, even for a doctor, when it's accruing at 4% interest. So that was definitely an important part of my decision. As far as like getting into a top tier medical school, I think a big part is setting yourself up with like your grades and your MCAT score. I think you're not going to have a very good shot of getting into a really top tier medical school unless you have a good GPA and a good MCAT. So that's why it's important to, pick a school that you, Cheryl, yes.
I'm going to brag about Anush and Matt that they have nearly perfect MCAT scores. And they have, pretty good MCAT scores. Anush is shaking his head. And they have very, very good grades. And they're not going to tell you that. And they've studied differently for the test. So I thought, as crazy Aunt Betty, I would tell you that they.
Yes. Well, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah. So so the MCAT, I don't know if we'll talk about this eventually, but yeah, the MCAT has 4 sections. There's like a biology, biochemistry section, a chemistry, physics section, a reading section, and then like a psychology, sociology section. How you do on that is very important, as it allows you to kind of, just like the ACT or the SAT now, every high school is different, but it allows you to compare yourself, on a standard scale against other people. And so I did score, it's out of like 528 and I scored a 526. So it's really important to kind of set yourself up with, a good MCAT and a good GPA that kind of puts you on the table. And then I would say what kind of gets you in is like your extracurriculars, doing something kind of above and beyond in any one of those realms, like publishing, in a big paper, or publishing a big paper in a journal would make you really stand out, I think. And then when you interview, which is, the interview holds a lot of weight, I think. And so showing that you're personable and you're like a normal human being who can interact with people in really stressful situations and really vulnerable situations, that is important. And Anush can talk more about that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think scores are, the initial filtration process is definitely based on grades. And I think they do want someone that's holistic and all of that jazz. But if you don't have the grades and if you don't have the MCAT, then they're not really going to consider you that seriously, I think. But I guess in terms of, I think I said this earlier, in terms of what they're looking for is they really want to know what unique thing you're going to contribute to at their university, and what are you going to do, like how, I think Ms. Sullivan also said this before about what would they lose by not taking you, basically. And so I think that's what they're really looking at, and I think especially the top tier schools. So like, and I think so I've interviewed at Stanford, and I think this is like the epitome of they're trying to look for, what are you going to contribute, what are they going to lose without you. And it wasn't just, oh, I want to do research and I want to teach. It's what type of research do you want to do? What type of field do you want to do? Do you want to, when you teach, like what's unique about your vision? What is your vision? Like this Silicon Valley idea of your 5-minute pitch about why someone should invest in you because your vision is so radical and transformative. And so that was, I think that's like one end of the scale in terms of what medical schools and top medical schools are looking for. And then I think some top ones are also just looking to see if you are personable, if you are the human that you say you are in your application. So yeah, so everything Matt said, and then also this.
Our next question is, for direct medicine programs that make decisions after regular undergraduate admissions first, will ED increase the chance of getting accepted than regular admission? Thank you.
No. The answer is no. ED is for admission to the university. Well, no, the admission to the direct med program is separate from the university. And so I'll give you an example for, I shouldn't name the school. There's a school out there that is competitive, but not crazy competitive. And one of our students was just really 35 ACT, really high grades, and did not get admitted to the university. We were shocked. And so we contacted the university. This is Detroit Country Day School. We contacted the university and asked, have we lost our minds? And you shouldn't matter, I know the story because I'm still talking about it. And the representative from the school said that student was denied, didn't get an interview for the direct medical program. So not one person who has ever been rejected from the direct medical program has attended that university. So they just reject them all. It's really interesting because the student might have attended that school. I don't. Now the student is in medical school right now, but she went through her undergrad. And but so no, it is a different process. It's a process on top of applying to the university. We would tell you to do early decision in some schools, like I know Johns Hopkins, and I don't know if Yuri is in biomedical engineering, but some schools that if you apply early decision to some program, like at Johns Hopkins for biomedical engineering, and they do not admit you to biomedical engineering, you are not held to the to the early decision. That is rare. So it is possible that if for a direct med, if you picked early decision and you did not get admitted to the direct med, maybe the school would not hold you to the early decision, but we would investigate that. Because we wouldn't want you to attend a school, we wouldn't want you to be caught in that trap. I hope that makes sense.
Our next question is, can you suggest websites for online shadowing or research opportunities for high school students during COVID, possibly during summer?
Did anyone hear of Lenox Hill? So there was this neurosurgery, I think it's a neurosurgery group in New York City that's kind of famous. And so they had a online shadowing all throughout the summer. And they also invited kids to attend lectures and talks that were given to the neurosurgery department. So I don't think it's going on right now, but it might happen again in the summer of 2021.
Was that for high school?
I think it was anybody that was interested, to be honest. It wasn't that regulated. And so they would live stream surgeries or things like that. I didn't attend, but I heard from people.
Our next question is, which year should we get the MCAT done?
just really quickly for the last question, also you can contact First Aid onSite Foundation and they will have opportunities. And then also to touch on this question, I'm sure Matt and Anu should probably be better off, but usually people try to take it the spring semester of their junior year if you want to be on track to going to medical school right out of college. I think that's at least what I'm going to try to do, but also I know it's a lot more common now to take gap years. So if you want to get in your core classes before junior year, if that's possible, but if not, gap years are much more common.
Yeah, so the MCAT is the test that you take that, as you mentioned, to, help kind of people understand, your, I guess, aptitude to medical school, although it doesn't really, I haven't used none of the skills that I learned from the MCAT really. But I think, so you can take it anytime you want, up until pretty much like the summer before your senior year, I would say. So my girlfriend is in medical school. She took it at the end of the summer, right before applications are, right before people are viewing your applications. You just want it scored by then. So it takes like 1 month to score. But you can like actually submit your application and then that takes some time to process, and you can take the MCAT pretty much at the same time as you're actually like pressing the submit button. And then by the time the schools are getting your application and looking at it, that's when they'll have your MCAT score. So you can actually take it, I would say the latest would be maybe around when you're actually sending your application. It does help if you have it in before so that you can like know what schools to look at, So like when I got my MCAT score, that shapes what schools you're applying to. And Anush can also hop in.
Yeah. You can take it after most people take it after their sophomore year. If they're not taking a gap year, they would take it between the summer after their sophomore year and the summer after their junior year. So that's when you would probably take it. But I guess it's also, you have to decide if you feel like you have the prerequisites to be able to take it. Some people in their first 2 years haven't necessarily been able to fit everything. And if they don't have the prerequisites, for example, I didn't have psychology or sociology. And so I took this Princeton review class. And I also didn't have that second semester of physics. And I really relied a lot on my high school physics. And I think that did end up biting me in the ass a little bit. But I think you really have to be strategic about what courses you've taken, how ready you feel, do you have the time to be able to dedicate to studying for the MCAT? Because it does require a lot of diligent studying and a lot of diligent time. And it's something that really has to be respected as a test. It's not really hard material. It's rather, there's a lot of material that's really diverse that you have to learn. And there's a lot of different test taking strategies and test taking skills that you really have to learn. And I think coming from Country Day, even if you come from Country Day, I think if you want to get into the 520s to get those top scores, then you really have to devote that time. And some people are able to do it with like a 6 weeks crash course study schedule, but I don't think they really get those top scores.
This next question is directed towards Matt and Anush. So did you guys take a MCAT review course?
Sorry, we should start specifying who's going to go first.
Yeah.
Anush, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, no, I took a Princeton review class. It was pretty good. There was a sale, and so I decided to take it. And also because I didn't have all the prerequisites. It was kind of good. You don't necessarily need it. Matt did fine without it. But I think if you want to have some sort of structure in your study schedule and you feel that you need that type of support, I think that it's really worthwhile. My whole big thing is I think universities should be offering these type of MCAT prep courses. I feel like because I don't think the MCAT is like that hard of a test. It's just that people don't always study for it properly. They underestimate it. They get distracted when they're studying for it. Yeah, do you have something to say?
Your test was, you took this Princeton review. One time I was on the phone with you and you're like, I got to go. My Princeton review test, it was like at night.
Yeah, it was.
And I thought
it
maybe would have gotten in the way of your schoolwork, says this old lady.
Yeah, no, so the semester I was studying for the MCAT, I took a much lighter course load. And that semester I took bio. I purposely took the classes that were going to be on the MCAT also. so that they're really fresh in my brain. So.
Yeah, I would say I agree that the prep courses can be nice, but just sometimes they're pretty expensive. There can be these big sales. I don't know. I've seen them sometimes for thousands of dollars, so they can be pretty pricey. I did not use them. I used a lot of other resources that were still still pretty helpful. I used the Princeton, I think they're the Princeton review books, maybe they're the Kaplan books, that they come in a set. They release them every year. You can buy like an older version because the material doesn't change. Yeah, I just read the Kaplan books, and there are bunches of like practice tests from different companies that you can purchase. There's something called like Next Step, UWorld. If you're ever really curious, you can go on like Reddit, and they have like tons of resources linked there that I would kind of browse. But yeah, I would say like the best thing is just kind of figure out what's best for you, and also to pay attention and like really like learn and encode things when you're in class, because I think in general the classes really do kind of set you up for success. If you kind of actually really like remember the things from your freshman bio classes and your physics classes, then you actually can, that sets you up with all the material that you need.
You're worried about like cost and stuff. I know that at Hopkins there's a lot of clubs and societies dedicated to medicine. For example, Med Life. I think if you're an active member, you get special discounts for MCAT prep material.
Yeah, universities, especially for low-income students, they have programs where they sponsor a Kaplan class or something like that. So, but you have to know where the resources are at, and you have to figure out how to apply, and that's a whole nother thing.
Our next question is once again intended for Matt or Anush. Do you recommend taking a gap year to do research or clinical rotations?
I can go first. I think a gap year should be number one. If you feel like you're not ready to apply to medical school, is your application package not the best that it can be? I think that's a big reason to take a gap year. And I think the second reason is, do you want time off before you're going into medical school? Because I think once that train starts, it's not something that's going to stop for a long time. And I think that it's really not as accepted, for example, to take a gap year between medical school and residency, right, Matt? So this is definitely like a big juncture point, because once you're in the medical school train, you're going to get matched, you're going to continue on with the rest of your life. But if you feel like you haven't done enough research, if you're applying to research heavy schools, if you're trying to get into top schools, then I think a research gap year is worthwhile. If you've had very little clinical experience, I think that you should have that clinical experience before you're applying, to be honest. So I don't know if you're taking one gap year, that's not going to actually be on your application. So if you're trying to do research or you're doing clinical experience and you're taking one gap year, that's not going to be on your application. It's going to be on your gap year little blurb, or it's going to be on an update that you send to your medical school. So a lot of people actually take 2 or 3 gap years, and it's becoming more and more common for people to do that. And I think it's like for the people who haven't really planned ahead, or if they find a meandering route to going into medicine, or if they struggle initially, that's more worthwhile. I took it because I wanted some time off, so I wanted to go abroad, but that didn't really work out because of COVID. So I've been doing some other things that have been really low key. But it's been nice. It's been like a good gap year.
Yeah, I think Anush brings up a good point in that when you apply to medical school, you fill out your AMCAS, that like Common App for Medical School. You fill that out pretty much in the summer before your senior year. So all that's on it is like your first 3 years. And sometimes it can be hard to kind of balance school and doing well in that, which we already said is really important, keeping your GPA high. Also balancing out the MCAT, getting those things in when you're, that's really like what you have to do when you're in college. but also trying to fit in other things, like we said, the shadowing, the research, the clinical experience, the non-clinical volunteering. That can be really difficult in just those 3 years, because your senior year, again, is not on it. Your senior year is when you do all the, you'll be writing secondaries and you'll be interviewing and stuff like that. So if you take one gap year, basically that allows you to get all 4 years on your application, but then whatever you do in your gap year, let's say you want to go be a scribe and an ED, so you would go and scribe during that year, and you can write about you know, that plan, and maybe like a little, like 2 sentences in like your intro statement or something like that, your personal statement, but it's not really something that's going to like impact your life or impact your application a lot. So yeah, really honestly, it's kind of lame, but if you really wanted to kind of diversify your portfolio, I feel like you sort of have to take like 2 gap years, because you know, finish your 4th year, spend a year doing something else. You shadow, you do research, you travel, you volunteer someplace, you join the Peace Corps, something like that, I don't know. And then your 2nd gap year is when you're applying to medical school. But yeah, I think gap years, so I did not take a gap year. I took like sort of a weird gap year. So because I took AP credits in college or in high school, I was able to finish my degree in 3 years, and my 4th year was a master's degree. So that is sort of like a gap year. If I want to tell people I took a gap year, I say that. But if I want to say I went straight through, you know, you can go both ways. But I don't think it's necessary. I think it's sad that it's becoming kind of like it feels like it's becoming necessary, because everybody, you know, is sort of doing that as a fad. And that it's actually, Anush mentioned in medical school, it's sort of becoming a thing in medical school too, where if you want to be in the really competitive specialties, you have to take a gap year and do research. And it's not really the best, because it's, you know, you want, if you want to have people to be able to kind of progress as they're, you know, on the normal route, then these gap years are, you know, kind of clogging that up.
Yeah, it's where do you want to spend the majority of time during, like, where do you want to invest your time in at what point? So for example, if you took a gap year now, that's an extra year. But for example, if you're doing surgery residency and you want to take a research year then, and when you're a little bit more focused and you're a little bit more tailored in terms of the type of career you're building, then it might make a little bit more sense then. So it's really what type of skills do you want when, and that's also how strong is your application when it is.
Our next question is, how did you choose what schools to apply to?
I can go first, since I've been making Anush go first every time. I think generally when you apply, you kind of pick how many schools you want to apply to. So somewhere in the 20 to 30 range is sort of average, you know, plus or minus depending on those other factors we discussed. The advice that I sort of got was do between maybe like 2/3 that are like in your like target school range, and then maybe like, you know, 1/6 reach schools, and then 1/6 sort of like safety schools. So basically what I would do is you can purchase a subscription to this thing called MSAR. It's like medical school admissions requirements. If you Google MSAR AAMC, I'm sure you'll find it. But basically that has kind of all the medical schools listed with some basic information about them, like their MCAT, their GPA, some demographics of their students, and then some like, you know, kind of information about the research and the city and stuff like that. So you can filter by MCAT and GPA. So I would kind of filter based on those, and, you know, maybe within, if their average MCAT is, you know, within 2 of yours, then you can kind of call that a target school. And then if it's, you know, above or below, then maybe that's like a reach school or a safety school. And so when I applied to like the 23 schools, you know, I tried to find, you know, maybe like 15 that were in my target range, and then a few that I thought were, you know, not really the easiest to get into, and then some safety schools. Like, I also would say you should apply to all your state schools. That is something that's big. State bias is a huge thing in medical school admissions. So being from a state like Michigan or Ohio, where it's not so big and there's actually a good amount of medical schools, is a benefit. If you are in California, where it's like disproportionately more students than medical schools, it's actually very difficult because you sort of don't have you don't have home field advantage anywhere. So yeah, Nush can talk about his experience as well.
Yeah, I think the proportions sound about good. And I think I don't think you have to buy an MSAR right now if you're in high school. I think that's something that you should be doing like at the end of college. It'll just like feed into your obsessions if you buy it now. But yeah, I think Matt covered most of that. I think I want to go back to the gap year thing in the sense that I think that with medical school, there's always this fear that you're going to be ancient by the time you're done with everything. And I think that's like almost like something that feeds into this paranoia in people from a very young age that, oh, it's such a young process. Oh, when are you going to start making money, or when are you going to finish everything? I think there's like some legitimacy to it because you're going to be in school for another 4 years and you probably have to figure out finances for those 4 years. And then residency isn't the most easiest thing. But I also think that you should, like, for example, if you're in your early 20s and you want to spend a year or two doing something that you want to do for fun and make some money, I think I'd do it. I don't think that you really need to be limited in doing that.
Also, because I know a lot of you guys are high school students and probably going through like the college admissions process, like when looking for a college, it's essentially the same idea, like finding target schools like your GPA and your ACT or SAT score align with. But also something I think is really important is like you are going to be living on campus, like find schools that have programs that interest you and have clubs and just city quality of life. I think that's a really important consideration.
There are a lot of questions regarding research. And so should we be doing research starting in high school, or is it important once we go to college? And also, do you find it mandatory in high school? And what are some of the ways to get into doing research?
Personally, I did not do any research in high school, and I actually started doing research this year as a sophomore. So I guess other people can talk about their experiences, but I don't think it's mandatory to do it in high school. I actually don't really know anyone who did do research in high school.
Yeah, I definitely did not do research in high school. When I got to college, I just went on, like I was a molecular genetics major. I just Googled Ohio State molecular genetics, found the faculty list. I picked like 5 people and I read like their most recent paper. And then I just emailed them and kind of, wrote a thoughtful question about the research and then said I'd like to meet with them. And if you email at Ohio State, it was kind of like maybe like a 3-to-1 ratio. If you reach out to 3 people, you'd get 1 response. So it's good to kind of cast a wide net. But I definitely did not do any in high school, and I don't know anyone in my class that did start in high school. So.
Yeah, no, it's not necessary to do in high school. And if you do it in high school, you don't have to do it while you're studying or during classes. But I think that the summer programs, there's a lot of good summer programs that you can apply to for summer research programs. And I think those are worthwhile. I think you'll meet a lot of people and you'll get at least a great introduction to what research can look like. And maybe you can start understanding what your interests are within research, because research can be anything in the world, basically. So I think those programs are definitely worthwhile to apply to. And they could give you some leg up in terms of when you're in college, of finding the laboratories that actually really interest you, or understanding maybe some of your professors' works a little bit more.
I personally did not do research either, but I think it's sort of akin to taking a gap year. It's not necessary, but it's becoming more and more common. Like I do know people who have done research in high school, and I don't know, it's if you can get it, go for it. If you like it, try it.
Okay, and one of our last questions will be, and this is direct toward Ms. Sullivan. When should high school students shadow? Is it best to shadow in one office continuously, or try multiple offices?
If you're talking about shadowing, you would be talking about a direct med, because it is not important that high school students shadow to get into college. It really isn't. And so, but if you're talking about a direct med, I would say in the 11th grade, at least in the summer, or perhaps during the 11th grade, to get some sort of experience. Remember, you are trying to convince a committee that you are fully aware. You're 17 or 18 years old. It's a very difficult thing to convince a committee at 17 or 18 years old that you are well suited to the field of medicine. And it's not only the difficulty of the curriculum, because anybody here, all these four are well suited to the difficulty of the curriculum, or you two, Alex and Arnav, you are. But it is, can you handle the emotional, people getting sick? I know Matt right now talks a lot about the stuff that he does. They bring it at Mayo, they bring in so many people. It's so emotional, deal with the most serious situations I've ever heard in my life. And so at 17 or 18 years old, how could you stand up to that? Well, you would demonstrate that through some of your shadowing. So it is very difficult. And the questions, I know the reason these questions are coming in is because people are saying, I'm having a difficult time doing this. Yes. And like when Nush was talking about sitting at the reception, that would be all right, but it wouldn't get you into a direct med program. You would have to really be able to talk about some sort of patient contact. One place a person could really start with some patient contact, and I realize it isn't surgery or something, but like that. But we have had some success with folks working in nursing homes, because back before COVID, now with COVID, that's absolutely out. But you could have really more patient contact than you could. When I was a child, at 14 years old, I was working at a hospital. I was, delivering mail. All those have dried up. And some hospitals have an age limit of 18 years old. So we have often turned to nursing homes for shadowing, because you could at least talk about the patient situation. It is difficult though. And I think you're talking about 10th and 11th grade.
I apologize, but it's currently 8:30 p.m. If your question was not answered, or if you have any other additional questions, or are just looking for volunteer opportunities, feel free to email us at info@firstaidonsite.org. Thank you. I would like to thank everyone who attended this webinar, and I'd also like to thank Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Rode, Mr. Vijala, Ariana, and Yuri. And thanks again for all of our event sponsors. See you all at the next webinar.